Hello everyone, and welcome to part 9 of how to make Breakout in Unity. So last time we got started on working on our lives counter and our score counter. As you can see here, when our ball hits the block we gain points, and when our ball goes past this bottom screen, then we lose a life. In this episode we are going to make it so you gain lives when you achieve a certain score, and if time permitted, we'll make it so our score and lives persist when we move on to next other scenes. So let's get started. We're going to open up our block controller and game manager scripts. Now the way we're going to handle gaining lives is we're going to create a static public integer called new life. And let's just initialize it to 0. And what new life is going to do is store a number that will represent how many points you need to get in order to earn a new life. So just for testing purposes, I'm going to initialize new life to be 100. And then in our block controller, after we have checked if the block health is 0 and incremented our score, we are going to check if the score is equal to our new life variable. And what this will do is check if score has reached or exceeded the value of new life. So make sure this is greater than or equal to, because if we need, say, 500 points and we destroy 2 green blocks, we'll get 600 points and then we'll miss our new life. That just wouldn't be fair. So here we're going to increment lives, and then we're going to take our new life value and multiply it by 2. You don't have to multiply it by 2 yourself. You can do whatever you feel like would be necessary. I just feel like doing 2 would be a good amount. So I got my array of blocks here, and I'm just going to test if lives increment. It should increment on the first one I destroy, which it did. Then I should have to destroy 2 more. So then I should have to destroy 400. Now I should have to get 800 points, and so on. So as you can see, lives is increasing accordingly. So now, and when I die, it loses a point, which is exactly what we wanted. So now what that means is that we have completed our score. However, I want to just increase the new life variable to be 2,500 points, because if you think about it, on your first level, there's probably going to be a 5x5 array of blocks, or red blocks in a 5x5 array, meaning it's possible to get 2,500 points, and I don't think you should just give out new lives on the first level. So it should be when you complete the first level, and then we'll just double it from there. So now that that's done, we are going to make it so our score count and our lives count remains persistent when we move on to the next scene. So let's start with making so the game loads a new scene. I'm going to go up to File and create a new scene just for testing purposes, and just save this as test. And what I need to do next is go into my build settings, and in this scenes in build is a list of which scenes will be in the game. And I want my test scene and my game scene to be in this scenes in build. I do not want to create a new build, and that's really because this is just for testing purposes. So then, in order to load a new level, In my game manager, I'm going to write using Unity Engine.scene management, and in the update function, I'm just going to destroy one block. So if score equals 100, and then I want to do load scene. Actually, I think it's scene manager dot load scene. Yeah, and we're going to load the scene 1 in our list. And remember, scene 1 is actually the second scene you put in there because the first one is number 0. So when I destroy this, it loads a new scene. And we'll tweak how abruptly it loads because I want it to be like a fade to black and then it goes to the next scene. But we'll do that when we go to polishing. Now for the tricky part. When the new scene loads, this data needs to be persistent. So what I'm going to do is take the main camera and the game manager, copy them, and paste them into our test scene. Oh. Paste. There they are. Now, in the game scene, I am going to break a block and load the next scene. But if you look into our hierarchy, we are juggling between a not loaded and a loaded test scene. This is because when our score is 100, we are constantly loading that scene. And as you can see here, our score is still 100 even though we're in a different scene. Now what we need to do is make sure that we are actually in a new level. One way to do that is check if there are no blocks. So I'm going to create another variable that counts how many blocks are in the scene, and then based on that, it decides whether or not we need to load a new scene. Now here, I'm going to have a private bool called new scene. And every time that it's true, we are going to count the blocks in update and then set new scene to false. And I want a private int called block count. And I'm just going to initialize it to 0. So here I'm just going to comment this out because I don't need it anymore. And I am going to create a way to count the blocks. So if this is in fact a new scene, we count blocks. And I'm also going to then set new scene to false. And because of this, we can ensure that we are counting the blocks only once. You know what? I actually want block count to be a static public int. Because what better way to count the blocks than just have the blocks count, tell them that they're here, and send that message to the game manager. So what I mean is, in our block controller script, on start, we do game manager dot block count plus plus. Now something you should know about start, this activates when the game object enters a scene and only once. So when it's initialized, so when we load another scene where we have new blocks, it'll just run block count one time at the start, and then we'll go from there. So in here, I want to print the block count. In fact, because we're doing that, we don't really need this if statement. Well, actually, we still do. Well, I'll just see if it turns out to be unnecessary when I go into implementation. But yeah, let's just print block count, and when we go to destroy a block, let's go into our game manager dot block count and decrement that number. So if I were to go into here, click play, I should read 20 on my console, which I do. And if I destroy 1, I read 19. Destroy 4, I read 17. And so on and so forth. And eventually, I'll get to 1. So I'll just pause until I get there. So here I am with my last block in the scene. Now what I want to do when the block gets destroyed is move on to the next scene. So what that means is instead in our game manager, we are going to see if our block count equals 0. Then we load the next scene, and we'll also have a private integer to count which scene we're on. And we'll also check our lives and everything later in future episodes. But here's the thing. In test scene, I also just need to go in and put down a block somewhere. That's odd. Okay, there it shows up. And the reason why I needed to do that is because every time it counts that there's 0 blocks, it will just load the new scene. So let's go into our scene 1 and just test how well we do that. I'm also just going to get rid of a majority of these blocks just so I can speed up the testing. Delete. So I'm down to just this one block. I shoot it, it gets destroyed, and we're not juggling between 2 scenes. In fact, we are counting 1 block in this new scene, which means now our score and our lives remains persistent. In fact, if I were to go into, actually one thing, if you were to go into your inspector panel on certain game objects and click this check, you can disable them, which means you also cannot select them in the scene view, which makes it a little easier to grab other objects, especially if they're overlapping and really difficult to get to. So I'm going to create several game objects and then just destroy them. And also lose a few lives while I'm at it. Oh wait, also be sure to re-enable the game object before if you disable it, otherwise you'll run into some issues. So now, I've got 2 lives, 1 life, and when I go destroy these, I should see 600 points and how many lives I left off with in the next scene. And the reason this works is because we used static variables, which are really dangerous sometimes. So you might want to limit, actually you definitely want to limit your usage of them, because it could harm how effective your game is. Because I've had earlier games where I used static variables and it would mess up like how their health of certain objects was. So sometimes you couldn't destroy an object because it calculated the health wrong, which is why I use private in certain cases. So like the block health here is this should be private. Like how these block health and score multipliers are private. That's just to make sure that you can't modify them anywhere outside the script, and you can't modify them in other scripts. So yeah, just something to look out for. Be sure to just limit your usage of static variables, except for universal variables that you would want to be visible in every single scene, such as your score. However, if you have multiple of the same scripts, like if I had more than one game manager script, then it would really start to mess things up. So remember, just be careful with static variables and make sure you know what you're doing. Alright. And I can also delete this. And that pretty much wraps it up for this video. We managed to finish our lives counter, and we made it so our score and lives is persistent between scenes. In the next episode, we are going to go over a game over screen and a victory screen. And we'll also do scene transitions that just fade to black and then load the next scene. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope you tune in for the next one. Goodbye.